At a charity gala, Alexander Wolf locks eyes with Camille Carter, the woman he walked away from 15 years ago. But when two identical boys call her Mom, everything changes. Are they his? And if so, can he win back the family he never knew he had? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Alexander Wolf stepped out of his sleek black Bentley, adjusting his custom-made suit as the ocean breeze ruffled his dark hair. At 42, he'd accomplished everything he'd set out to do. Built a real estate empire from the ground up, amassed a fortune that put him on the covers of business magazines, and established himself as one of New York's most eligible bachelors. The Siu, Grand Oceanside Hotel loomed before him, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Tonight's charity gala would be filled with potential investors, and Alexander never missed an opportunity for business. This small coastal town of Bay Harbor wasn't his usual scene, but the wealthy vacationers who flocked here each summer made it worth his while. "Mr. Wolf," the event coordinator rushed forward, practically tripping over herself. "We're so honored to have you here. Your donation to the Children's Hospital was incredibly generous." Alexander nodded, offering his practiced smile. "Just doing my part." As he walked into the ballroom, heads turned. He was used to it, the whispers, the stares. His reputation preceded him everywhere. Alexander Wolf, the man with the Midas touch. What they didn't know was how empty it all felt sometimes. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room. The usual crowd, doctors, lawyers, local business owners. Nothing he hadn't seen before. Nothing that interested him until he saw them. Two boys, identical in every way, racing through the crowd, their dark hair and bright blue eyes standing out against their white dress shirts. Something about them made Alexander freeze. The sharp jaw, the slight dimple in the left cheek when they smiled, the piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. His eyes. Time seemed to slow. The champagne glass nearly slipped from his fingers. It couldn't be, it was impossible. One of the boys stopped suddenly, staring at Alexander with wide eyes. He tugged on his brother's sleeve, pointing. "Mommy!" he called out, voice carrying across the room. "That's the man from the picture on your nightstand." Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. He turned his head slowly, following the boy's gaze. And there she was, Camille Carter. 15 years had passed, but he would know her anywhere. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, falling just past her shoulders instead of down her back. Fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, evidence of laughter, of a life lived. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her skin. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Their eyes met across the room, and Alexander saw the shock register on her face, then something else, fear. She rushed forward, grabbing both boys by the shoulders. "Tyler, Jason, that's enough running, let's go get some cake." "But Mom," one of them protested, still staring at Alexander. "Isn't that the man?" "Not now." She cut him off, her voice tight. She ushered them away, throwing one last panicked glance over her shoulder at Alexander. He stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. Those boys, her boys, they had to be what? 12, 13. The timing. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Not just her boys, his boys. Alexander pushed through the crowd, ignoring the people trying to get his attention. He had to talk to her, had to know. By the time he reached the dessert table, they were gone. "The woman who was just here," he demanded of the caterer. "With the twin boys, where did she go?" The woman pointed toward a side door. "I think they stepped outside. Sir, would you like to try the—" But Alexander was already moving, his mind racing faster than his feet. Why didn't she tell him? Did she think he wouldn't care? Was she protecting them and or protecting herself? He burst through the door onto a garden terrace. The evening air was cool, carrying the salt scent of the ocean. His eyes scanned the space until he found them, huddled together near the railing. Camille. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, then turned slowly to face him. Up close, he could see the slight tremble in her hands as she kept them firmly on the boy's shoulders. "Alexander," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "I didn't know you'd be here." Clearly. The word came out harsher than he intended. He took a breath, trying to calm himself. These are your sons? Camille lifted her chin. Yes, my sons. One of the boys looked up at her, confusion written across his face. Mom, who is this? Alexander couldn't take his eyes off them. They were the spitting image of him at that. Age, the same cowlick at the crown of the head, the same slight furrow between the brows when they frowned. Tyler Jason, Camille said carefully. This is an old friend of mine, Mr. Wolf. Alexander, he corrected, kneeling down to their level. It's nice to meet you both. The boys glanced at each other, then back at him. One of them, Tyler, stepped forward slightly. You're on Mum's nightstand, he said matter-of-factly, in the silver frame. Alexander's heart lurched. She'd kept his picture all these years. Tyler, Camille warned, her cheeks flushing. How old are you? Alexander asked them directly. 13, they answered in unison. 13 years, 9 months after he'd left. The math was undeniable. He stood, meeting Camille's eyes. We need to talk. Not now, she said firmly. Boys, why don't you go back inside and find Aunt Lisa? Tell her I'll be there in a minute. But Mom, please, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The boys threw curious glances at Alexander before reluctantly heading back inside. As the door closed behind them, Camille's composed facade crumbled. What are you doing here? She demanded. You can't just... Are they mine? The question hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Camille's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, out toward the ocean. You left, Alexander. You made your choice. That doesn't answer my question. He stepped closer. Are they mine? She turned back to him, anger and pain battling for dominance in her expression. Yes, she whispered. They're yours. Even though he'd already known the answer, hearing her confirm, it made his knees weak. He gripped the railing for support. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was low, dangerous. 13 years, Camille. 13 years of their lives gone. You made it very clear that I didn't fit into your grand plans, she shot back. Your family, your career, they were always more important. What was I supposed to do? Beg you to take responsibility? Force you to choose me when you'd already chosen everything else? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, memories flooding back. His father's cold disapproval, his mother's tears, the ultimatum they'd given him, Camille or his inheritance, the way he'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing, that a clean break would be better for both of them. You still should have told me, he insisted. They're my sons, I had a right to know. And they had a right to a father who wanted them. Camille's voice broke. Not someone who would resent them for derailing his perfect life. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Back then he might have seen them as an obstacle, but now, I want to know them, he said firmly. I want to be part of their lives. Camille laughed, a bitter sound. Just like that? You think you can walk back in after 13 years and play daddy? They don't even know you exist, Alexander. As far as they're concerned, their father was a man who died before they were born. The lie hit him like a slap. You told them I was dead? I told them what they needed to hear. She wiped at a tear angrily. That their father was a good man who would have loved them if he'd known them. It was easier than the truth. Alexander's temper flared. And what is the truth, according to you, that I abandoned them, that I didn't care? The truth is that you abandoned me, Camille said quietly, and I had to pick up the pieces. I had to build a life for us without you. The door opened behind them, and one of the twins, Jason, he thought, poked his head out. Mom, Aunt Lisa, says it's time for the speeches. Camille quickly composed herself, wiping away the last traces of tears. I'll be right there, sweetie. Jason's eyes darted between them, clearly sensing the tension. Are you okay? I'm fine, she assured him, with a forced smile. Go back inside, I'll be there in a minute. Once they were alone, again Alexander spoke. This isn't over, Camille, I want to know my sons. She met his gaze, steely determination replacing her earlier vulnerability. You lost that right a long time ago. Stay away from my boys, Alexander. I mean it. Before he could respond, She walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of what he'd just discovered. Her family, his family, one he never knew existed until now, and he wasn't about to let them go. Not again, not ever. Inside the ballroom, Alexander watched from a distance as Camille rejoined her sons, putting a protective arm around each of them. The trio stood together, a perfect unit forged through years of love and shared experiences. Experiences he knew nothing about. First steps, first words, school plays and baseball games. Every birthday, every Christmas, every skinned knee and nightmare. All the moments large and small that made up his sons' lives, all lost to him but not anymore. As he observed them, a resolve hardened within him. He would get to know his sons. He would be part of their lives. Whatever it took. Even if it meant confronting the past he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Even if it meant facing the greatest mistake he'd ever made, walking away from Camille Carter. Alexander barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, the twins, his sons, staring back at him with his own blue eyes. He paced the luxury suite he'd booked at the Grand Oceanside Hotel, his mind racing. By morning, he had made up his mind. He wasn't leaving Bay Harbor until he got to know his sons. Picking up his phone, he called his assistant in New York. "Linda, cancel all my meetings for the next 2 weeks." 2 weeks, Linda sounded alarmed. "But sir, you have the board meeting on Thursday and the Morgan deal." "Handle it," Alexander cut her off. "Tell them something came up, a family emergency." The words felt strange on his tongue. Family emergency. For the first time in his life, those words were actually true. After a quick shower, Alexander headed downstairs to the hotel restaurant. He needed a plan. Simply showing up at Camille's doorstep wouldn't work. She had made her feelings clear last night. He needed more information. "More coffee, sir?" The waitress refilled his cup with a smile. "Thank you," Alexander paused, noticing her name tag. "Sarah, right? You've probably worked here a while. Do you know much about the locals?" The young woman looked surprised. "Born and raised here, sir. Bay Harbor's not that big. Most of us know each other. Do you happen to know Camille Carter? She has twin boys, about 13. Sarah's face lit up. "Miss Carter? Of course. Everyone knows her. She runs the bookstore downtown. Pages and Chapters. The twins, Tyler and Jason, they're good kids, always helping their mom at the store after school." Alexander felt a strange mixture of gratitude and jealousy. This waitress knew more about his sons than he did. "The bookstore," he repeated. "Thank you, Sarah, that's very helpful." An hour later, Alexander stood across the street from Pages and Chapters, a charming storefront with large windows displaying colorful book covers. Through the glass, he could see Camille helping a customer, her smile warm and genuine. This was her life, the life she had built without him. As he watched, the door opened and a small group of schoolchildren filed out, followed by one of the twins. The boy waved goodbye to his friends, then turned to head back into the store. Alexander didn't think. He just moved. "Jason? Or is it Tyler?" The boy stopped, studying Alexander with curious eyes. "I'm Jason. You're the man from the party. Mom's friend." Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Alexander swallowed hard. "That's right. I'm Alexander Wolf." "Why do you have a picture on Mom's nightstand?" Jason asked bluntly. Alexander hesitated. "Your mother and I knew each other a long time ago, before you were born." "Were you in love with her?" The directness of the question caught Alexander off guard. "It was. Complicated." Jason frowned, looking so much like a young Alexander that it was almost painful to see. Adults always say that when they don't want to tell the truth. Alexander couldn't help but smile. "You're pretty smart for 13. Mom says I got my brains from her," Jason replied with a grin, then tilted his head. "But Tyler and I have your eyes." Alexander froze. "What do you mean?" "I heard Mom talking to Aunt Lisa last night after the party. She was crying." Jason's expression became serious. "She said we have your eyes and your smile, and she doesn't know what to do now that you're back." The boy was more perceptive than Alexander had given him credit for. Before he could respond, the bookstore door flew open. "Jason!" Camille stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Inside. Now." But Mom, now, Jason. The boy gave Alexander an apologetic look before reluctantly obeying his mother. As soon as he was inside, Camille stepped onto the sidewalk, closing the door behind her. "I told you to stay away," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "What part of that was unclear?" "Camille, please," Alexander held up his hands. "I just want to talk." "Talk?" She crossed her arms. 13 years of silence and now you want to talk?" Alexander looked around at the busy street. "Can we go somewhere private, please?" Camille hesitated, then sighed. "The cafe next door has a back patio. 10 minutes, Alexander. That's all you get." The small cafe was busy, but the patio was relatively quiet. They sat at a table in the corner, as far from other patrons as possible. "You lied to them," Alexander said once they were seated. "You told them I was dead." Camille stirred her coffee slowly. "I never actually said you were dead. I just didn't correct their assumption." "That's still a lie, Camille. What was I supposed to tell them?" She looked up, her brown eyes flashing with hurt. "That their father chose his family's money over us? That he walked away and never looked back?" The accusation stung, mostly because it contained more truth than Alexander wanted to admit. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. Camille's laugh was hollow. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Alexander. What you did was a choice. A deliberate choice." Memories washed over him. The small apartment they'd shared while he finished business school, her working 2 jobs to support them. The day he told her about his family's ultimatum, the way she'd begged him not to go. "I thought I was doing what was best," he said. "I had nothing to offer you then." "Except yourself," Camille replied softly. "That's all I ever wanted." A heavy silence fell between them. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" Alexander finally asked. Camille looked away. 3 weeks after you left. Did you try to contact me?" She nodded. "I called your parents' house," your mother answered. "She told me you were engaged to someone else and that I should stop embarrassing myself." Her voice cracked slightly. "I believed her." Alexander felt sick. His mother had lied. There had been no engagement. Just another way to ensure he wouldn't go back to Camille. "I never knew," he whispered. "I swear to you, Camille, if I had known about the babies—" "What?" she challenged. "You would have left. Your precious wolf empire? Defied your father?" "We both know that's not true." Deep down, Alexander wasn't sure she was wrong. The ambitious young man he'd been might have justified staying away, might have convinced himself that child support checks were enough. The thought shamed him now. "I'm not that person anymore," he said firmly, "and I want to know my sons." Camille studied his face, searching for something. "Why now, Alexander? What do you really want?" "A chance," he replied simply. "They're my flesh and blood. I've missed 13 years. I don't want to miss any more." Before she could respond, the cafe door opened, and both twins burst onto the patio, slightly out of breath. "Mom!" Tyler exclaimed. "Aunt Lisa said—" He stopped short when he saw Alexander. "You're him, aren't you?" Tyler asked, his eyes narrowing. "The man in the picture, the one Jason was talking about." Alexander glanced at Camille, who closed her eyes briefly in resignation. "Boys," she said carefully, "this is complicated. He's our father, isn't he?" Jason stepped forward. "I heard you last night, Mom, on the phone with Aunt Lisa." Camille looked trapped. "This isn't how I wanted to do this," she whispered. Alexander stood slowly. "Yes," he said, looking directly at the twins. "I'm your father." The words hung in the air, changing everything. "But you said our father was gone before we were born?" Tyler's voice was accusing as he turned to his mother. "I thought it would be easier," Camille admitted. "I was trying to protect you." "From what? From me?" Alexander asked. "From the truth," she replied. "That your father chose not to be part of our lives." Alexander flinched. "That's not fair, Camille. I didn't know they existed." "Didn't know?" Jason looked confused. "Mom didn't tell you about us?" "No," Alexander said gently. "She didn't." "Because he was gone, Jason," Camille explained, her voice strained. "He left before I knew I was pregnant." Tyler's eyes darted between the adults. "Why did you leave? It was the question Alexander had been dreading. How could he explain family, pressure and ambition to a 13-year-old? How could he make them understand without sounding selfish and weak? "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he said finally. "I thought other things were more important than your mother's love. I was wrong." The simple admission seemed to surprise Camille. She looked at him with new eyes, as if seeing something she hadn't before. "Are you rich?" Tyler asked suddenly. "Jason Googled you last night. It said you're worth billions." "Tyler," Camille scolded. Alexander smiled slightly. "Money doesn't make up for lost time," he said. "But yes, I've been successful in business." "Do you have other kids?" Jason asked. "No," Alexander shook his head. "No other children." "So we're your only family?" Tyler pressed. The question hit Alexander hard. His parents had passed away years ago. His father from a heart attack, his mother from cancer. His relationships with women had been shallow and brief. The truth was he had no one. "Yes," he said softly. "You're my only family." The boys exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that twins often share. "Can we talk to him, Mom?" Jason asked. "Just talk?" Camille looked torn. Alexander could see the battle within her, the desire to protect her sons from potential hurt versus their natural curiosity about the father they never knew. "Please," Alexander added quietly, "just a chance to get to know them." After what seemed like an eternity, Camille nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "but we do this my way, on my terms." "Anything," Alexander agreed quickly. "Dinner," she decided. "Tonight at our house, 6 o'clock. Just talking, Alexander. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't get their hopes up." "I understand." The twins broke into identical grins, their excitement palpable. "We live on Oak Street," Jason offered. "The blue house with the big elm tree in front." "I'll find it," Alexander promised. As Camille ushered the twins back toward the bookstore, Alexander called after her. "Camille." She turned, her expression guarded. "Thank you," he said simply. She didn't smile, but some of the tension left her shoulders. 6 o'clock. Don't be late." Alexander watched them go, his heart lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a chance to make things right. As he walked back to his hotel, he pulled out his phone and made another call. "Linda, one more thing. I need you to look into real estate in Bay Harbor. Something suitable for extended stays. This wasn't going to be a quick visit. Alexander Wolf was here to stay, to reclaim the family he never knew existed." Across town, Camille sat in the back office of her bookstore, her hands shaking as she dialed her sister's number. "Lisa, it's happening. He wants to be part of their lives." She paused, listening. "No, I can't just send him away. The boys already know." Another pause. "I know what he did to me. I haven't forgotten." She sighed heavily. "But this isn't just about me anymore. They deserve to know their father, even if that means letting him back into my life." As she hung up, Camille glanced at the silver-framed photograph she kept hidden in her desk drawer. A younger Alexander, smiling at the camera, his arm around her waist. The love in his eyes had seemed so real then. Could she trust him again? Could she let her sons trust him? For their sake, she had to try. But she wouldn't let him hurt them the way he had hurt her. This time she would be stronger. This time she would protect her heart. And if Alexander Wolf thought he could waltz back into their lives and take over, he was about to learn just how much Camille Carter had changed in 15 years. Alexander stood on the porch of the Blue House on Oak Street, a bottle of wine in one hand and a large bag from the local toy store in the other. He checked his watch. 5:55 p.m. early, but not too early. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door flew open almost immediately. Tyler and Jason stood side by side, identical grins on their faces. "You came," Tyler exclaimed. "You brought presents?" Jason added, eyeing the bag. Alexander smiled. "Just a few things I thought you might like." "Boys, let him at least come inside before you start interrogating him." Camille appeared behind them, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She wore jeans and a simple green blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Even dressed casually, she took his breath away. The inside of the house was warm and inviting. Nothing like the cold, formal mansion he'd grown up in. Photos lined the walls, documenting the twins' lives from infancy to the present. Baseball. Trophies sat on shelves alongside academic awards. This was a real home, filled with love and memories. "I brought this for you," Alexander said, handing Camille the wine. "And these are for the boys, if that's okay." She took the bottle with a nod. "Thank you. And yes, they can open your gifts after dinner, which is almost ready." "Can we show him?" "Our room first?" Jason asked. Camille hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes, then we eat." The twins practically dragged Alexander up the stairs, chattering excitedly. Their bedroom was exactly what you'd expect for 13-year-old boys. Sports posters on the walls, video game controllers scattered about, bunk beds with mismatched comforters. "I'm on top," Tyler announced, pointing to the upper bunk. "Jason kicks in his sleep." "I do not," Jason protested. "Do too," Alexander laughed. "I had a brother too, we fought all the time." "You have a brother?" Jason asked, suddenly interested. "Had," Alexander corrected quietly. "David died in a car accident when I was in college." "Oh." The twins exchanged somber looks. "We're sorry." Alexander appreciated their empathy. "It was a long time ago, but cherish each other, okay? Brothers are special." "Even when they steal your stuff?" Tyler asked pointedly, glaring at Jason. "Especially then," Alexander assured him. With a smile, the tour continued with a rapid-fire showcase of their prized possessions: baseball cards, a drone they'd saved up for, science fair ribbons. "Mom says we get our brains from her and our looks from you," Jason informed him matter-of-factly. "She's right about that," Alexander agreed, studying their faces. "Though I see plenty of her in you too." "Did you love her?" Tyler asked suddenly. "Our mom." The directness caught Alexander off guard again. These boys didn't pull punches. "Yes," he answered honestly. "Very much." "Then why did you leave?" The hurt in Jason's voice was palpable. Alexander sighed, sitting down on the edge of the lower bunk. "Sometimes adults make choices they later regret. I thought I needed to follow a certain path to be successful. I was wrong. But you are successful," Tyler pointed out. "You're like super rich." "Money isn't everything," Alexander said. "I learned that too late." Before the conversation could go deeper, Camille called from downstairs. "Dinner's ready." Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. The twins dominated the conversation, peppering Alexander with questions about his life in New York, his business, and his childhood. "Were you always rich?" Tyler asked between bites of lasagna. "No," Alexander smiled. "My family had money, but I wanted to make it on my own. I started my first real estate company with just one small property and built from there." "Mom says, hard work is more important than talent," Jason chimed in. Alexander glanced at Camille. "Your mother is a wise woman." "She works really hard," Tyler agreed. "The bookstore. Plus she teaches creative writing at the community college 2 nights a week." Pride swelled in Alexander's chest. "That doesn't surprise me. She was always the smartest person I knew." A slight blush colored Camille's cheeks. "Boys, why don't you clear the table? Then you can open Mr. Wolf's gifts." "Alexander," he corrected gently. "Please." She met his eyes briefly before looking away. Alexander's gifts. The twins eagerly cleared the dishes in record time, then sat expectantly at the table. Alexander handed over the bag, watching as they pulled out the contents: the latest video game console, several games, 2 identical smartwatches, and 2 envelopes. "Whoa," Tyler exclaimed, examining the gaming system. "This is the one that just came." "Out!" "The one Mom said was too expensive," Jason added, then quickly backtracked when he saw Camille's expression. "I mean, thank you," Alexander smiled. "You're welcome. And the envelopes too." The boys opened them to find tickets to the upcoming baseball game between the Red Sox and the Yankees. "Front row?" Jason's eyes widened. "These must have cost a fortune." Alexander shrugged. "I thought maybe we could go together, all of us," he added, glancing at Camille. Her expression was unreadable. "That's very generous, but—" "Please, Mom," the twins begged in unison. Camille sighed. "We'll see." Alexander could sense her discomfort. He was coming on too strong, too fast. "It's just an offer," he said. "No pressure." After the excitement of the gifts, the twins convinced Alexander to play a board game with them. As they sat around the coffee table in the living room, laughing and teasing each other, he felt a contentment he couldn't remember experiencing before. This was what family felt like. Camille watched from the doorway, her arms crossed. When she caught Alexander looking at her, she gestured toward the kitchen. He excused himself from the game and followed her. "You can't buy their love, Alexander," she said once they were alone. "That's not what I'm trying to do, isn't it?" Her voice was tight. "The expensive gifts, the front row tickets, you're showing them a lifestyle I can't provide." Alexander ran, a hand through his hair. "I'm just trying to connect with them." "They're 13, Camille reminded him. "Impressionable, don't make promises you won't keep." The implications stung. "I'm not going anywhere, Camille. I meant what I said. I want to be part of their lives." "Until when?" she challenged. "Until you get bored? Until your business calls you back to New York? Until some new woman catches your eye? That's not fair, isn't it?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You left once before." Alexander stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've changed. I'm not that same selfish kid who walked away." "Prove it," she whispered. Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with unresolved feelings. For a moment, Alexander thought she might let him in, not just into their lives, but back into her heart. The moment was broken by the twins calling from the living room. "It's your turn, Alexander." He stepped back, giving Camille space. "I should get back to the game," she nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Go ahead." Later, as the evening wound down, Alexander found himself sitting on the porch swing with Camille after the twins had gone upstairs to try out their new game console. "They're amazing kids," he said softly. "You've done an incredible job with them." Camille smiled, the first genuine smile she'd directed at him all night. "They are pretty great, aren't they? They're smart, polite, confident, everything a parent could hope for." "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "Raising twins alone while starting a business. There were some really tough years." Alexander felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry I wasn't there to help." She was quiet for a moment. "What would you have done if you'd known?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since the moment he'd seen the boys. "Honestly, I don't know what the younger me would have done. But now, I would move heaven and earth to be in their lives." "And what about your life in New York, your business?" "I can run my company from anywhere," he said. "Technology makes that possible. In fact," he hesitated, unsure if he should share his plans yet. "In fact, what?" Camille prompted. "I made an offer on a house here in Bay Harbor." Her eyes widened. "You what?" "It's on Lighthouse Point. Nothing too ostentatious," he hurried to add. "Just a place where I can stay while I'm here, where the boys could visit. If that's okay with you." Camille looked stunned. "You're really serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Alexander said firmly. "I've missed 13 years, Camille. I won't miss any more." Before she could respond, the front door opened and Lisa, Camille's sister, stepped onto the porch. Her expression hardened when she saw Alexander. "So it's true," she said coldly. "You're back." "Lisa," Camille stood quickly. "I didn't expect you tonight." "Clearly." Lisa's gaze never left Alexander. "I wanted to see for myself." Alexander stood, extending his hand. "It's been a long time, Lisa." She ignored his outstretched hand. "Not long enough. Do you have any idea what you did to my sister? The nights she cried herself to sleep. The double shifts she worked while pregnant to save enough money for when the twins arrived." "Lisa, stop," Camille pleaded. "No, she's right," Alexander said quietly. "I have a lot to answer for. You can't just waltz back in and play daddy after all this time," Lisa continued, her voice rising. "You don't deserve them." "You're right," Alexander agreed, surprising both sisters. "I don't deserve them, or Camille's forgiveness. But the boys deserve to know their father, and I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of that title." Lisa seemed taken aback by his admission. She looked at Camille. "And you're okay with this?" "I'm figuring it out," Camille replied honestly. "For the boys' sake." A tense silence fell over the porch. "I should go," Alexander said finally. "It's getting late." Camille nodded. Thank you for coming and for the gifts." The boys were thrilled. "Can I see them tomorrow?" he asked. "Maybe take them to lunch?" Before Camille could answer, Lisa interjected. "How do we know you won't just disappear again? Leave them heartbroken?" It was a fair question, one Alexander had anticipated. "I understand your concern," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "That's why I had my lawyer draw this up today." He handed Camille an envelope. Inside was a legal document establishing a trust fund for the twins' education and future, regardless of his involvement in their lives. "This isn't about buying their affection," he explained as she scanned the paper. "It's about security. No matter what happens between us, even if you decide tomorrow that you don't want me in their lives, they'll be taken care of." Camille looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and cautious gratitude. "This is generous. It's the least I can do," Alexander said. 13 years of child support, plus interest, and there are no strings attached. Lisa peered over her sister's shoulder at the document. Even she seemed impressed by the figure. "I'd still like to be involved," Alexander continued. "But that's up to you, Camille. You're their mother. You know what's best for them." She folded the document and placed it back in the envelope. "Lunch tomorrow would be fine. The boys will be at the bookstore until noon." Alexander smiled. "I'll pick them." "Up there," he turned to Lisa. "It was good seeing you again, Lisa. I understand your protective instincts. I'd feel the same way in your position." Lisa's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered in her eyes. "Just don't hurt them," she warned. "Any of them." "I won't," he promised. "Not again." As Alexander walked to his car, he felt Camille's eyes on him. When he turned back, she gave him a small wave from the porch. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. He had a long way to go to earn back her trust, but for the first time in 15 years, Alexander Wolf felt hope. Across town, in a dimly lit bar, a woman sat alone nursing a martini. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on her cell phone as she waited. Finally it rang. "Did you find him?" she demanded without preamble. "Yes, Ms. Reynolds," the voice on the other end replied. "Mr. Wolf is staying at the Grand Oceanside Hotel in Bay Harbor." "And?" she pressed. "What's he doing there? It's not exactly a business hotspot." "He appears to be reconnecting with an old girlfriend and her children, twin boys." Vivian Reynolds' grip tightened on her glass. "Children. Alexander doesn't have children. According to my sources, he does. 13-year-old twin boys." The timing suggests they were conceived shortly before he returned to New York 15 years ago. Vivian's perfectly painted lips curved into a cold smile. "How interesting. It seems my fiancé has been keeping secrets." She took a sip of her martini. "Book me on the next flight to Bay Harbor. I think it's time I paid Alexander a surprise." "Visit?" "Yes, Ms. Reynolds." As she hung up, Vivian stared at her enormous diamond engagement ring. 6 months of planning the society wedding of the year, of securing her place as the future Mrs. Alexander Wolf, wasn't going to be derailed by some small-town ex-girlfriend and a couple of brats. Alexander was hers, and Vivian Reynolds always got what she wanted. Back at the Blue House on Oak Street, Camille sat alone in her bedroom staring at the silver-framed photograph of Alexander. For 13 years, she'd kept it hidden, a reminder of both the happiest and most painful time of her life. Lisa knocked softly on the doorframe. "Are you okay?" Camille sighed. "I don't know. When he left, I thought I'd never recover. And now he's back and the boys are so excited and I'm just scared," Lisa finished for her. "It's okay to be scared, Cam. What if he hurts them? What if he makes promises he can't keep?" Lisa sat beside her sister on the bed. "What if he doesn't? What if he really has changed?" Camille looked surprised. "I thought you hated him." "I hate what he did to you," Lisa corrected. "But I saw the way he looked at the twins tonight and the way he looked at you." "Don't," Camille warned. "That ship sailed a long time ago." "Did it?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Because there's still something there, Cam. I can see it." Camille put the photograph face down on her nightstand. "Even if there was, I can't risk it. Not again. Not with the boys involved. Just be careful." Lisa advised. Guard your heart, but don't let the past blind you to what might be right in front of you. After Lisa left, Camille picked up the trust fund document Alexander had given her. The amount was staggering, more money than she could have provided in a lifetime. Was it guilt money? Or was it, as he claimed, simply wanting to do the right thing? She remembered the way he'd played board games with the twins, the genuine laughter, the ease with which he fit into their little family circle. It had felt so natural, as if there had been a space waiting for him all along. Camille touched her lips, remembering their last kiss 15 years ago, desperate and tearful as he walked away. Despite everything, a part of her had never stopped loving him. That was the most frightening truth of all. As she prepared for bed, Camille didn't notice the headlights of a taxi pulling up to the Grand Oceanside Hotel, or the elegant woman stepping out, her determined gaze fixed on the top floor where Alexander Wolf was staying. The past was colliding with the present, and soon everyone's lives would change forever. Alexander woke early the next morning, energized despite the lack of sleep. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond making money or closing deals. He had a family, 2 incredible sons, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance with the only woman he'd ever truly loved. After a quick shower, he headed down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. He was halfway through his coffee when a familiar voice made his blood run cold. "There you are, darling. I've been looking all over for you." Alexander's head snapped up. Vivian Reynolds stood before him, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, diamond earrings glittering at her lobes. "Vivian," he managed, rising to his feet. "What are you doing here?" She leaned in to kiss his cheek, her grip on his arm tight enough to leave marks. "Is that any way to greet your fiancé? I was worried when you suddenly extended your trip." Alexander glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware of the curious stares from other diners. "Let's talk in private," he said, guiding her toward the elevator. Once inside his suite, Vivian's pleasant facade dropped. "What's going on, Alexander? First you cancel all your meetings, then you're buying property in this backwater town. The board is getting nervous." "How did you know about the house?" Alexander demanded. Vivian waved dismissively. "That's not important. What's important is why you're throwing away everything we've built. And who exactly is this woman you've been seeing? The one with the twins?" Alexander's jaw clenched. "You had me followed. I had to protect our interests," she countered. "Now who is she?" "Her name is Camille Carter," Alexander said carefully. "She's an old friend." Vivian laughed coldly. "Friend? Please, Alexander, I know about the boys. The timing is rather suspicious. Don't you think? 13 years old, conceived right around the time you were finishing business school, before you met me." "It's complicated," Alexander said. "Is it?" Vivian stepped closer. "Or is it very simple? Some woman from your past is trying to trap you with a sob story about secret children. How do you even know they're yours?" The accusation made Alexander's temper flare. "They're mine," he said firmly. "One look at them and there's no question. And Camille isn't some woman. She's the mother of my children." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Children you never knew about until 2 days ago. Don't you find that convenient? Just as we're about to announce our engagement to the board." Alexander stared at her, suddenly seeing Vivian clearly for the first time. The cold calculation in her eyes, the way she talked about our interests and our engagement, as if they were just another business merger. "There is no we, Vivian," he said quietly. "Not anymore." She blinked in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "I'm calling off our engagement." Vivian's face contorted with anger. "Because of her, because of those boys, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Alexander replied. "Meeting my sons has made me realize what's really important. And it's not mergers or acquisitions or having the perfect power couple image that you care so much about. You'll regret this," Vivian hissed. "The board won't take kindly to their CEO throwing away a strategic alliance for some small-town nobody. And her bastard children." Alexander's voice became dangerous. "Don't ever speak about my family that way again." "Family?" Vivian laughed bitterly. "You've known them for all of 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, I felt more connected to them than I ever did to you in 2 years," Alexander replied. Our relationship was always about business, Vivian. We both know that. Vivian's eyes flashed with fury as she pulled off her enormous diamond ring and threw it at him. This isn't over, Alexander. No one walks away from me, no one. As she stormed toward the door, she paused with her hand on the knob. Enjoy playing house with your little family. It won't last. The door slammed behind her, leaving Alexander alone with the realization that he'd just upended his entire life. And he didn't regret it for a second. Across town, Camille was opening the bookstore, her mind still processing the events of the previous evening. The twins had been up early, excited about their lunch with Alexander. "Mom, can we wear our new watches?" Tyler had asked over breakfast. "Do you think he'll take us to that fancy seafood place by the marina?" Jason added. Their enthusiasm both warmed and worried her. They were already so attached after just one meeting. What if Alexander changed his mind about staying in Bay Harbor? What if his novelty as a father wore off? Her boys would be devastated. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Camille from her thoughts. A striking woman in an expensive suit entered, surveying the small bookstore with barely concealed disdain. "Can I help you?" Camille asked. The woman approached the counter, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Camille Carter." "Yes," Camille replied hesitantly. "I'm Vivian Reynolds," the woman said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Alexander Wolf's fiancée." The words hit Camille like a physical blow. Fiancée. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Camille managed, her mouth suddenly dry. "No misunderstanding," Vivian assured her. "Alexander and I have been together for 2 years. We're getting married in the fall. The announcement was supposed to be next week, but then he came here and found you." Camille gripped the counter. "For support. I think you should leave." "I will," Vivian nodded. "But first, let's be clear about what's happening here. Alexander feels guilty about abandoning you and those boys. He's having a momentary crisis of conscience. It will pass." "You don't know anything about us?" Camille said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I know enough," Vivian countered. "I know that Alexander has spent 15 years building an empire that would be jeopardized by a scandal involving secret children and an old girlfriend." "Is that a threat?" Vivian shrugged elegantly. "Just a reality check. Alexander's life is in New York. His future is with me. This," she gestured around the modest bookstore, "is a fantasy, one that will fade as soon as reality sets in." Before Camille could respond, the back door opened and the twins entered from the storage room, carrying boxes of new inventory. "Mom, we finished unpacking the—" Jason stopped short when he saw Vivian. Vivian's expression changed as she took in the boys, her eyes widening, slightly at their resemblance to Alexander. "Hello," she said, her voice suddenly honeyed. "You must be Tyler and Jason. I'm a friend of your father's." "Our father?" Tyler looked confused. "You know Alexander?" "Oh, we're very close," Vivian smiled. "In fact, we're leaving," Camille interrupted firmly. "She was just leaving. Boys, please finish with the inventory." Reluctantly, the twins returned to the storeroom, throwing curious glances over their shoulders. Once they were gone, Camille stepped out from behind the counter, her fear replaced by fierce, protective instinct. "Stay away from my sons." "They're Alexander's sons, too," Vivian pointed out. "And they're adorable. I can see why he's so distracted." "This isn't a distraction," Camille said. "They're his flesh and blood. And I'm his future," Vivian replied smoothly. "Do you really want to put those boys through the pain of getting to know a father who will ultimately choose his real life over them again?" The barb hit its mark. It was Camille's deepest fear voiced by a perfect stranger. "I think we understand each other," Vivian said, noting Camille's stricken expression. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You seem like a nice person who got caught in Alexander's orbit. Many women have been there, none of them keep him." With that, she turned and left, the bell jingling cheerfully behind her. Camille sank onto a nearby chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Fiancée. Alexander had a fiancée, and he hadn't said a word about her. Just like 15 years ago, he'd let Camille believe one thing while hiding the truth. Nothing had changed. He was still the same man who'd walked away without looking back. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Alexander. "Looking forward to lunch with the boys. See you at noon." Camille's hands shook as she typed her reply. "Don't come, I know about Vivian, stay away from us." She hit send, then turned off her phone, unable to bear seeing his response. In the back room, she found the twins sorting books, oblivious to the storm raging in her heart. "Who was that lady?" Jason asked. "No one important," Camille lied, forcing a smile. "Listen, boys, there's been a change of plans. Alexander can't make lunch today." Their faces fell in perfect synchronization. "But why?" Tyler demanded. "Something came up," Camille said vaguely. "These things happen." "Can we call him?" Jason suggested. "No," Camille said, more sharply than she intended. Seeing their hurt expressions, she softened her tone. "Not right now. He's busy." As the twins reluctantly went back to work, Camille felt the familiar weight of single parenthood settling back onto her shoulders. For a brief, shining moment, she'd allowed herself to hope that things might be different, that Alexander might have changed. She'd been a fool. Alexander stared at Camille's text message in disbelief. "Stay away from us." 4 words that shattered the fragile hope he'd been nurturing. He tried calling her, but his calls went straight to voicemail. When he arrived at the bookstore at noon, the "closed for lunch" sign hung in the window, though he could see lights on inside. He knocked, but no one answered. "She knows about Vivian," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. Damn it. He should have told Camille about his engagement the moment they'd started talking again. But he'd been so caught up in discovering his sons, in reconnecting with her, that the relationship he'd been planning to end anyway had seemed irrelevant. Now, it might cost him everything. Alexander paced outside the bookstore, trying to decide his next move. The most important thing was that Camille understand the truth, that his engagement to Vivian had been essentially a business arrangement, one he'd already ended, that his feelings for Camille had never died, even after 15 years apart. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "Please give me a chance to explain. It's not what you think. I've already ended things with Vivian. You and the boys are what matter to me now." No response. For 3 days, Alexander tried everything. He sent flowers to the bookstore. He wrote letters explaining the situation. He even enlisted Lisa, who, after initially slamming the door in his face, eventually agreed to at least hear him out. "I believe you've ended things with your fiancé," Lisa said after he'd explained. "But that doesn't change the fact that you kept her existence a secret. Camille feels betrayed all over again." "I made a mistake," Alexander admitted. "But I love her, Lisa. I've never stopped loving her. And I love those boys." Lisa studied him for a long moment. "You hurt her once before. She survived it. But the twins, they're devastated that their newfound father disappeared overnight. That kind of hurt doesn't heal easily." "I haven't disappeared," Alexander insisted. "I'm right here fighting for them." "Then keep fighting," Lisa advised. "If you're serious about being part of their lives, prove it." Alexander took her words to heart. He moved forward with the purchase of the house on Lighthouse Point. He set up a local office for his business. He made it clear to everyone in Bay Harbor that he was there to stay, with or without Camille's forgiveness. But the distance from his sons was killing him. Each day that passed without seeing them, without hearing their voices or watching them grow, was another day lost, another memory missed. Then, a week after Vivian's visit, Alexander received a text from an unknown number. "Pier 7, 4 p.m. We need to talk." T&J, the twins. They'd reached out to him. Alexander arrived at the pier 15 minutes early, his heart racing. The wooden boardwalk stretched out over the bay, mostly deserted on this weekday afternoon. At the far end, he spotted them. 2 identical figures, sitting side by side, their legs dangling over the edge. "Tyler, Jason?" he called softly as he approached. They turned in unison, their expressions serious. "You came," Tyler said. "Of course I came," Alexander replied, sitting down beside them. "I've missed you boys." "Mom said you have a fiancé," Jason stated bluntly. Alexander nodded. "I did. Not anymore." "Why didn't you tell us?" Tyler's voice held the hurt that Lisa had warned about. "I should have," Alexander admitted. It was wrong to keep it from you and your mother. I was going to end it anyway, but that's no excuse. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications. Mom's really sad, Jason said. She pretends she's not, but we can hear her crying at night. The knowledge that he'd caused Camille more pain cut Alexander deeply. I never wanted to hurt her again. Or you. Then why did you? Tyler challenged. Because I made a mistake, Alexander said honestly. Adults make mistakes too, even big ones, but I'm trying to fix it. How? Jason asked. Alexander looked out over the water, gathering his thoughts. By proving to your mother that I'm here to stay, that I won't walk away again, no matter what. She thinks you will, Tyler informed him. She says that's what you do. When things get hard. The assessment was fair given their history. That was the old me, Alexander said. The man I am now, the father I want to be, doesn't run from challenges. He faces them. The twins seem to consider this. We checked out the trust fund thing, Jason said. Mom showed it to Aunt Lisa's husband. He's a lawyer. And? Alexander asked. He said it's legit, Tyler confirmed. Like, really legit. No strings attached. Because I don't want anything from you or your mother except the chance to be in your lives, Alexander explained. The money is yours whether you want me around or not. Another silent twin conference followed. We want you around, Jason finally said. We've always wanted a dad. Even if he messes up sometimes, Tyler added with a small smile. Alexander felt a surge of emotion. I'm going to mess up sometimes, he warned them. But I promise I'll always try to do better, and I'll never ever walk away again. We believe you, Jason said. But Mom's the problem, Tyler added. She's scared to trust you, Alexander nodded. I know, and she has every right to be. We have a plan, Jason announced, leaning forward, conspiratorially. But you have to follow our instructions exactly. For the first time in days, Alexander felt a flicker of hope. I'm all ears. 3 days later, Camille locked up the bookstore after a particularly slow afternoon. The summer tourist season was winding down, and the locals were busy preparing for the start of the school year. The twins had gone to spend the night at a friend's house, leaving her with a rare evening to herself. As she walked toward her car, she noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. Thinking it was an advertisement, she almost threw it away without reading it, but something made her unfold it. Follow the blue ribbons, a journey worth taking. Camille looked up, noticing for the first time a blue ribbon tied to a nearby lamppost. Curiosity battled with caution. Alexander. It had to be him. Part of her wanted to ignore the note, to get in her car and drive home to the safety of her routine. But another part, the part that still remembered the warmth of his smile, the gentle way he'd played board games with the twins, the sincerity in his eyes. When he'd said he wanted to be part of their lives, that part won out. She followed the blue ribbon to another, tied to a tree down the street. And another, attached to a park bench. Each ribbon led to the next, creating a trail through town. The path took her past familiar landmarks, the community college where she taught writing classes, the ice cream shop where she'd taken the twins. After their first day of kindergarten, the small gazebo where she'd read stories to them as toddlers, places that held the history of her life with her sons. The final ribbon was tied to the railing of Pier 7, where a small rowboat was docked, another blue ribbon fluttering from its bow. In the boat sat Alexander, dressed simply in jeans and a white shirt. What is this? Camille asked, approaching cautiously. A journey, Alexander replied, extending his hand to help her into the boat. Will you trust me just for a little while? Against her better judgment, Camille took his hand and stepped into the boat. Alexander rowed them out into the bay, the setting sun casting golden light across the water. I should be angry with you, Camille said as they drifted away from shore. Showing up like this, the ribbons, the boat, it's manipulative. It was the twins' idea, actually, Alexander admitted. They thought you might not give me a chance to explain otherwise. Camille's eyes widened. The twins? They've been in contact with you? Alexander nodded. They reached out to me. They're wise beyond their years, Camille, and they want us to at least talk. Camille fell silent, absorbing this new information. Her sons had gone behind her back to arrange this meeting. Part of her was upset at their interference, but another part was touched by their determination to bring their parents together. "You lied to me, Alexander," she said finally. "Again. You had a fiancé." "I did," he acknowledged. "And I should have told you right away that was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Then why didn't you?" Alexander rested the oars, letting the boat drift gently on the calm water. "Because when I saw you and the boys, nothing else seemed important. Not my business. Not New York, and certainly not my engagement to Vivian, which was more of a business arrangement than a love match. I ended it the moment she showed up here. She came to the bookstore," Camille revealed. "She made it very clear that your real life is elsewhere." "She's wrong," Alexander said firmly. "My real life is here, with you and the boys. It always should have been." The sincerity in his voice made Camille's resolve waver. "How can I believe that? How can I trust that you won't walk away again when things get tough?" "Because I've spent 15 years regretting the biggest mistake of my life," Alexander replied. "Because every success, every achievement felt hollow without you to share it with. Because the moment I saw our sons, I knew there was nothing more important in this world than being their father." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "And because of this." Camille's breath caught as he opened it, revealing not a ring but a key. "This is the key to the house on Lighthouse Point," Alexander explained. "I closed on it yesterday. I'm staying in Bay Harbor, Camille, for good. Whether you decide to give us another chance or not, I will be here for Tyler and Jason. Every day, every school play, every baseball game, every skinned knee and nightmare. All the moments I've missed and all the ones to come." Tears filled Camille's eyes. "Alexander, I love you, Camille," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I never stopped, and I love our boys more than I ever thought possible. Please, give us a chance to be the family we should have been all along." The boat drifted closer to shore, and Camille noticed a small crowd gathered on the beach, Lisa and her husband, several of her friends from town, and at the front, Tyler and Jason watching anxiously. "The boys are quite the matchmakers," she said with a watery laugh. "They're persistent," Alexander agreed, "like their mother." As they reached the shore, Tyler and Jason rushed forward to steady the boat. "Did it work?" Tyler asked eagerly. "Did you guys talk? Are you still mad at him?" Jason added, looking at his mother. Camille looked from her sons to Alexander, seeing the hope and love in all three pairs of identical blue eyes. The family resemblance had never been more striking or more moving. "I'm not mad," she said softly. "Just cautious," Mom, Tyler said with the exasperation only a 13-year-old could muster. "He bought a house here. He's staying for good. And he broke up with that lady," Jason chimed in. "We checked." "You checked?" Camille raised an eyebrow. The twins looked sheepish. "We might have called his office in New York," Tyler admitted. "Pretended to be taking a survey about employee satisfaction. And his assistant Linda told us all about how he called off the engagement and is relocating to Bay Harbor permanently," Jason finished proudly. Camille couldn't help but laugh. "You two are impossible, but you love us," they chorused. "Yes," she agreed, "I do." Alexander stepped out of the boat and stood beside her, close but not touching, respecting her space. "The question is," he said quietly, "could you ever love me again? Even a little?" Camille looked up at him, at the man who had broken her heart and the father of her children, the man who had moved heaven and earth to be part of their lives, the only man she had ever truly loved. "I never stopped," she whispered. Alexander's face lit up with joy as he pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that held 15 years of lost time, regret, forgiveness, and hope for the future. The twins whooped in victory, high-fiving each other as the small crowd on the beach applauded. "Does this mean Alexander's moving in with us?" Tyler asked when their parents finally broke apart. "Slow down, kiddo," Camille laughed. "One step at a time." "But he is our dad," Jason stated matter-of-factly. "For real now." Alexander knelt down. To their level, his eyes serious. "I've always been your dad," he said. "I just didn't know it, but now that I do, I promise I'll be the best father I can be, every day for the rest of my life." The twins launched themselves into his arms, and Alexander held them tight, his eyes meeting Camille's over their heads. The love and gratitude in his gaze made her heart swell. It wouldn't be easy. They had years of separation to overcome, trust to rebuild, a new family dynamic to create. But looking at Alexander with their sons, Camille knew they would find their way, because some bonds, even those hidden for years, are unbreakable once discovered, and some loves, no matter how deeply buried, never truly die. 6 months later, the Blue House on Oak Street was filled with laughter and the delicious smell of Thanksgiving dinner. Alexander moved expertly around the kitchen, helping Camille with the final preparations, while the twins set the table in the dining room. "I still can't believe you can cook," Camille teased, sliding the sweet potato casserole into the oven beside. "The turkey. One of the many hidden talents you're discovering," Alexander replied with a wink, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Gross, they're being mushy again," Tyler announced as he entered the kitchen for more napkins. "Get used to it," Alexander laughed, dropping a quick kiss on Camille's neck before letting her go. In the months since their reconciliation, they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Alexander had moved into the house on Lighthouse Point, but spent most evenings at the Blue House on Oak Street with Camille and the boys. They were taking things slowly, rebuilding their relationship day by day, but the love between them had only grown stronger. As they gathered around the table for dinner, Camille looked at the faces of her family, her sons, growing too quickly, toward manhood, and Alexander, the love she had lost and found again. "Before we eat," Alexander said, raising his glass, "I want to propose a toast to family, the ones we're born with, the ones we find, and the ones we create together." "To family," everyone echoed. Later, after the twins had gone upstairs and Lisa and her husband had headed home, Alexander and Camille sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the November chill. "Happy?" Alexander asked, his arm around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought possible," Camille replied honestly. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Then maybe you'd consider making me the happiest man alive." He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Alexander," Camille breathed. "I know it's only been 6 months," he said quickly, "and we can wait as long as you want before actually getting married. But I want you to know that I'm certain about you, about us, about our family." Tears filled Camille's eyes as she looked, from the ring to the man holding it. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll marry you." As they sealed their engagement with a kiss, the porch light illuminated 2 silhouettes watching from an upstairs window. "Finally," Tyler whispered to his brother. "Told you Thanksgiving would be perfect," Jason replied smugly. "Should we tell them we already started calling him Dad?" Tyler grinned. "Let's let them have this moment. Besides, Dad already knows. He's been signing our permission slips that way for months." The twins shared a smile before slipping back to their room, leaving their parents to their private celebration. On the porch below, Alexander held Camille close, marveling at how completely his life had changed in just a few short months. From a lonely billionaire with nothing but his business to live for, to a man surrounded by love, laughter, and the family he never knew existed, until fate had brought them together again. And this time, nothing would tear them apart. The end.